Welcome to a Legendarium special about Lope de Aguirre, the Mad Conquistador. In this episode, we will talk about a man who left Spain in search of God, gold, and glory, but only found infamy. Lope de Aguirre came into the world, unfortunately, sometime around the year 1512 in the tiny Basque province of Guipuzcoa on the border with France. By his own account, his parents had aristocratic blood but very little else. Being the younger brother, even his family's modest inheritance would be denied to him. And like many young men in such a position, Lope de Aguirre traveled to the Americas in search of fame and fortune, hoping to follow in the footsteps of Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro, who overthrew vast indigenous empires and gained enormous wealth. Aguirre left Spain around 1534, too late to seize the vast wealth of the Incan Empire, but in time to become embroiled in the many civil wars that broke out among the surviving members of Pizarro's band in South America. A capable soldier, Aguirre found himself in high demand from the various factions. In 1544, he defended the regime of Viceroy Blasco Núñez Villa, tasked with carrying out unpopular new laws which provided protection to the indigenous people of South America. Most Spaniards hated these laws, for they came to the Americas to become rich by squeezing the indigenous nations. In 1551, Aguirre appeared in Potosi, a wealthy mining town in present-day Bolivia. There, the authorities arrested him for abusing Indians. Judge Francisco de Esquivel sentenced him to a whipping. It is unknown what Aguirre did to merit this, as Spaniards routinely abused and murdered Native Americans, making it likely this involved a grudge between Aguirre and another Spaniard. According to legend, Aguirre became so incensed at his sentence that he stalked the judge for 3 years, following him from Lima to Quito before he murdered the judge in his sleep. The legend says Aguirre did not have a horse and followed the judge on foot for the entire time. Unsurprisingly, around this time, he earned the nickname Aguirre the Madman. Aguirre spent a few more years fighting in civil wars, serving rebels or royalists at different times. Finally, a court sentenced Aguirre to death for the murder of a high official, but later pardoned him. They did so not out of clemency, but because the court needed Aguirre to put down an uprising led by Francisco Hernandez Giron, which he did at the Battle of Chuquinga in 1554. During the battle, Aguirre's right foot and leg became crippled, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. After the Battle of Chuquinga, Aguirre became a bitter, unstable man. He fought in countless wars and feuds and suffered terrible wounds, but had nothing to show for it. Close to 50 years old, he remained as poor as the day he left Spain. He had nothing except his terrible reputation and a daughter named Elvira, whose mother is unknown. By 1554, the Spanish explored most of the Americas, but huge gaps remained in their knowledge of the interior. As often happens, imagination populated the blank spaces on the map. Many Spaniards, filled with greed, believed in the myth of El Dorado, or the Golden Man, a king who supposedly covered his body with gold dust and ruled over a fabulously wealthy city. Those who sought wealth proved eager to believe in this legend. In 1559, the Viceroy of Peru, Andres Hurtado de Mendoza, approved an expedition to search for the legendary El Dorado. By doing so, he also emptied New Spain of men who might start another rebellion. Low-born aristocrats like Lope de Aguirre saw war as the only suitable occupation for a man of their rank, so getting rid of them would ensure a peaceful province. About 370 Spanish soldiers and a few hundred Indians came under the command of a young nobleman named Pedro de Ursua. Aguirre joined on September 26, 1560, and then became a high-level officer because of his experience. However, Pedro de Ursua proved the sort of person that Aguirre hated most. 15 years younger than Aguirre, his important family connections brought him unearned wealth and privilege with far less effort. As a sign of his privilege, Ursua even brought along his mistress, a privilege denied to the rest of his men. The expedition began exploring the Amazon River and its tributaries in the dense rainforests of eastern South America. Instead of rich cities waiting to be plundered, they found hostile natives, diseases, and very little food. Before long, Aguirre became the leader of a group of men who wanted to go home to Peru. In time, Aguirre's men expressed their displeasure with Ursua's leadership by invading his tent during the night and expressing their displeasure with knives. Fernando de Guzman, a flunky of Aguirre, took command of the expedition. Yet, Aguirre did something truly astonishing. He and his men declared themselves to be the new kingdom of Peru, independent of Spain, and declared Guzman to be the Prince of Peru and Chile. Aguirre became increasingly paranoid that his new subjects would overthrow him as he overthrew his previous commander, so he ordered the death of the priest that accompanied the expedition, along with Inés de Atienza, Ursua's former lover, and then Guzman, declaring himself the leader of the new kingdom. He then hatched a mad scheme in which he and his expedition would travel to the coast, find their way to Panama and Lima, then conquer both to create a new empire. The first part of Aguirre's plan went well, considering a ragged band of half-starved conquistadors led by a madman carried it out. They made their way to the coast by following the Orinoco River, then captured the small Spanish settlement at Isla Margarita. He ordered the death of the governor and 50 locals, mainly women. After looting the settlement, they went to the mainland and landed at Berberada before they marched to Valencia and seized it. There, Aguirre composed his famous letter to King Philip II of Spain in July 1561. In it, he explained his reasons for declaring independence more than 200 years before the American Revolution. He noted that after many hard years of service to the crown, he had nothing to show for it, but saw loyal men executed for false crimes. He singled out judges, priests, and bureaucrats for special scorn. Aguirre shockingly declared that one found no kings in heaven, and that even in hell you would be worse than Lucifer because you all thirst after human blood. Curiously, the man who hated kings gave himself grand titles like Wrath of God, Prince of Freedom, and King of Tierra Firme. King Philip's reaction to this document is unknown, but his men weakened Aguirre by offering pardons to the expedition members if they abandoned Lope de Aguirre. Several men stole small boats to make their way to safety, and Aguirre, now down to 150 men, moved to the town of Barquisimeto, where Spanish forces surrounded him. His men, unsurprisingly, deserted in vast numbers, leaving Lope de Aguirre alone with his daughter Elvira. Surrounded and facing capture, Aguirre murdered his daughter so that she would be spared the horrors that awaited her as the daughter of a traitor. When another woman grappled with him for his arquebus, he dropped it and instead stabbed Elvira to death with a dagger. Spanish troops, reinforced by his own deserters, quickly cornered him, and the horrified royal commander ordered Aguirre shot and then chopped to pieces. Different parts of Aguirre's corpse went to the surrounding towns as a reminder to what awaited traitors. If not for the madness of Lope de Aguirre, history would have forgotten the Ursua expedition and Aguirre himself. Yet by the time Aguirre died, he caused the deaths of 72 of his own explorers, and in Spanish America his name became a synonym for cruelty and treachery. His twisted legacy lives on in literature and film. Many writers and filmmakers found inspiration in the tale of a madman leading a troop of greedy, hungry men through dense jungles. There have been a handful of books written about Aguirre, among them Abel Pause's Daimon and Miguel Otero Silva's Lope de Aguirre. There have been 3 films about Aguirre's El Dorado expedition, the best known being the 1972 German movie Aguirre, Wrath of God, starring Klaus Kinski and directed by Werner Herzog. It is also thought by some that Lope de Aguirre inspired the character of Kurtz in Heart of Darkness and his movie counterpart Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.